Okay, welcome in everybody. Sorry I'm a little bit late. Just getting things started over here. Let's we're going to be talking about Mercury opposite Uranus today. That'll be the subject of our live stream. I've got a list of things to talk about, an I Ching reading to get to, horoscopes for all of you. So I think this will be a really fun session, and then whatever time we have left over will be dedicated to some Q&A. So as we go along today, I will also be plugging the Kickstarter. In fact, I'm realizing that I need to pull that up. Here we go. Okay. Getting myself set up here, guys. Give me just a second. Alrighty. One more thing, and we should be ready to roll. There we go. All right. Okay, where are you guys coming from? Let's do some roll call before we get started. Tell me where in the world you are coming from. I have my chocolate. I've got my water. I've got the I Ching horoscopes ready to go, but it's just not as fun unless we start with some roll call and hear where you're coming from. First thing I mumbled to my husband this morning, no paywall, no subscriptions, free content. Yeah, that's it. Lauren's coming from Nashville. Don't forget the chocolate. No, I've got it. From Munich, from Bucharest, Romania. Oh, that's awesome. Nice. From sunny San Diego, Park Rapids, Minnesota, where you guys just got a boatload of snow. We got some snow down here in Minneapolis, but not like you guys did. Salt Lake City, Nuevo, New Jersey, Albuquerque, Ontario, from Sicily. I love it. And from Sacramento, from Ohio, from Switzerland, Long Island. Yes. Yes, I can't wait for you to get something from the Kickstarter. I'm going to tell you all about the rewards we have today. I'm going to get into it. I finished all of them this month. It took several weeks to create a number of the rewards. They're all done. Very excited. I'll tell you more about them. South of France, Greenville, Toronto, India, Egypt, Cleveland, from Cleveland to Egypt and Egypt to Cleveland, San Francisco, Ontario. What? Sedona. Oh, I know you now, Sedona lady. I know you now. Is it Kansas? KS? Is that Kansas? I think it is. Let's see. Hello, Satnam from Oregon. Yeah. Indianapolis, Bronx, Alberta, Hampshire. Feels like it should be Shire. Okay. Chico. Love it. Well, thank you guys. Thank you guys for being here and sharing where you're coming from. It's really nice to hear from all of you. Again, we're in the midst of the first of all, how was Mars square Saturn for all of you? That was crazy. That was what do I want to say? What was that? That was a hard contractive space. For me anyway. I got a lot of work done under a lot of pressure and time constraints. That was sort of how it showed up for me, as well as a few very frustrating situations where I felt like I kind of needed to bite a stick. But be curious to hear how you guys did with Mars Saturn. We're moving on now to Uranus and Mercury. A whole different kind of frustration. I'm kidding. A whole different kind of archetypal dynamic, which we're going to explore today. After we explore that from the perspective of the archive, we're going to look at Mercury and Uranus as principles built into the pattern fabric of reality itself. take a huge 20,000 foot view at this combination philosophically, and then try to distill it into our everyday human lives, and then distill it even further through some horoscopes. So that's going to be how we're going to handle it. I'm going to use the I Ching to help us understand this dynamic as well. The I Ching sometimes gives us a particular angle of the archetypal combination to think about. So we'll look at that today. I think that'll be a fun inclusion in our process as well. Now, before we get into all of this, first of all, thank you to how many people? 512, 513 backers that we have so far. As you know, I've said this every day, we are trying to get to 2043, which means we really need a little over 1,500 more backers between now and the end of the year. If you have not yet donated today during the live stream, please consider making this the day that you give your donation. Here is the link in the live stream comments. It will also be pinned to the top of the comment section and the description of the video in the replay if you're listening to it later today or tomorrow or whatever. Find that link, head over to the Kickstarter campaign. I'm going to tell you about the rewards that are available. I'll do like a brief breakdown of the different rewards you can choose. First of all, the absolute best thing that we offer during this time of year are the discounts on our classes. So if you want to come study astrology with us in our year 1 program, we have a year 2 and 3 program. So 3 years worth of professional level training and certification courses that we offer through Nightlight in Hellenistic astrology and reading natal charts. So those 3 years, everything you need to, if you're interested in developing a private practice along with our lineage, our kind of Nightlight community lineage, those classes I lead, they're all live, they're in person, they cycle through the calendar year in, year out, just like a real school, and everything's recorded in case you can't make it live. There's a ton of really great content. Check it all out on the website, and know that we have 1, 2, 3, and 4 class bundles. Every year, there are 2 new classes each year, a new guild, which is brand new this year, and a new master class. So if you're in the Nightlight pipeline, you can use these class passes to save on joining every new year's guild or master class. There's also the year 1, 2, 3 and horary classes, which are our core curriculum, 4 years worth of content. You can use the class passes for those. When you bundle those programs through the Kickstarter, which you'll see at the very bottom. So if I go all the way to the bottom, you're going to see attend 4 Nightlight courses. If you use a 4 class pass, the classes are going down to $500 each, which is almost that's about 70% off. So that's our best deal of the year. We only run it during the Kickstarter every year as a way of supporting the channel. And effectively, because the Kickstarter acts as a sale for all of our courses, this is what enables us to offer 60% of the students who come through who are hurting financially some form of aid so that the program doesn't push them outside of their means. That's hugely important to us. That's our core sort of altruistic, like value at Nightlight, is that we want spiritual education and astrology to be accessible for people of different incomes and socioeconomic backgrounds. So when you support the Kickstarter and you pick up a class pass and you come study with us through the sale of the Kickstarter, you're supporting that need-based model. That's really the coolest thing that it does. Now, also, the Kickstarter offers a variety of other really good awards. So 1, 2, 3, or 4 class passes, those are the best deals that we run. My wife teaches herbal classes. Those are, if you follow her on her Kickstarter or her YouTube channel, her classes are available through the Kickstarter, her year 1 and 2 herbal apprenticeships. Has a master's degree in clinical herbal medicine and teaches some really nice apprenticeship courses online. You can find any of the individual classes like the guild membership or the 2026 master classes this year, which are on the Decans. Those are on sale through the Kickstarter. You could also use those in the class pass bundles if you wanted. We have previously archived masterclass bundles by year, which is about 30 hours of masterclass content from 2023, 24, 25. So those archive bundles are on sale compared to what you would find them, the prices at on the shop page on the website. So check all of those out. Some really good savings there. Ask 3 horary questions. You can use those with me throughout the year anytime you want. It's basically outcome-oriented questions like, will I get the job, or will we stay together, or will he ask me out? Very specific kind of yes, no, predictive questions. You can ask 3 of them to me on the year, and I'll send you email responses with the chart and the breakdown and everything. Those are my personalized readings that you can get. You get a bundle of 3 of them, saves you about $100 off what it would cost if you booked them on the website. So that's a good deal. Our astrology for total beginners is on sale, so you can find that. And then some other masterclass, just like generic like masterclasses from the past that are just listed there, some of our most popular ones. The year ahead horoscope readings are one of our most popular rewards. That is going to be about, I tracked it between, I think it's like between 4 and 5 hours worth of content this year. It's different every year, but so this is your sun or rising sign horoscopes for 2026. It includes forecasts for the year ahead for your rising sign. All 12 are included in the bundle. So you get the whole thing to listen to. You could listen to it for yourself, for your husband, or for your friends, or whatever. And that's going to include looking at all of the major outer planetary events of the year, like the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, the Pluto-Uranus trines, the eclipses of the year, the nodal change of the year, the major retrogrades of the year, the biggest lunation of the year, like all sorts of stuff like that, jammed into one horoscope. And so you're getting a ton of insight for your year ahead in those horoscopes. That's a very popular reward. And you can listen and watch those on your own. They're all audio video recorded. You can hop in on the early publication chapter by chapter of my next book, which is there. You can check it out. Then there's some guided meditations. These are new. I really had a lot of fun making these and recording them. So there's one, the Oracle Within, which is a very like guided visualization that I created. It's really fun. And then the Astrology of 2026, that's about an hour and a half long talk on all of the major events of 2026. So if you want, that's going to be like, look, these are the big events of the year, not horoscope context, just like big mundane breakdown of the year of 2026. It's about an hour and a half long talk. A talk called Inviting the Silence. That's a talk on the importance of prayer, mindfulness, meditation, silence as astrologers, and why it's important for us as astrologers. That's a fun talk. And then you can pick up our calendar for the year and see where we're heading on the channel. So that's kind of a breakdown of all of the rewards. Thank you for giving me a moment to tell you about them. We really need your help. So I do these live streams as a way of drumming up support for the Kickstarter. I'll be doing another one next Friday at 10 a.m. The next Friday's live stream will be on next Friday's live stream will be on Venus-Saturn. Venus and Saturn are squaring one another next weekend. So on Friday, we're going to take a look at Venus square Saturn, do horoscopes, Q&A, the whole thing. When we are live, if you appreciate this content, if it speaks to you, I ask everyone, ask yourself 2 questions. If you are here a couple times a month, a couple times a week, if you're here throughout the year as a part of your rhythm, does it provide you throughout the year even a few times with significant moments of spiritual insight or help? Second question, do you learn something new about astrology? Are you learning and deepening your relationship with astrology through this channel? If you can say yes to either of those things, then know that on our end, we spend 3 to 4 hours a day between the creation, the distribution, the editing, and the curating of every daily piece of content, now 7 days a week, year round. There's no paywalls, there's no subscriptions. We want to make it free and accessible. And all we ask is at the end of the year, if you like it, pitch in. If it's $5, it's $5. We don't care. Pick up a great reward. Obviously, there's great sales you can take advantage of, but even $2 energetically, I deeply believe this. I know it can be cliched, but when there's something that you're getting that's of great value and you give back to support it, it will deepen your connection to what you're able to receive from it. That's why I support any and all of the sources of wisdom, insight, information over the past that have meant something to me. I've always actively tried to support however I can. Because if I'm getting something good out of it and I give back to it, that deepens the reciprocity of the relationship. You're supporting me. This is how I earn my living, but it's also how I support a staff of 12 people, a full-time social media manager who does nothing but help me curate this channel. So there's a lot of good stuff behind what happens at Nightlight, and it means a lot to us when you support it. So all of that in mind, thank you. I'll come back to plug the Kickstarter a little bit later in today's live stream after we've done horoscopes and gotten through everything. Let's see how much progress we can make between now and then. So as of the start of this program, we're at 512 backers. Let's see if we can get 20 or 30 backers during this program. I think we can do it. Okay. Now, let's talk about this. I'm going to put the real-time clock up, and we're going to go bananas here. We have so much to talk about with this transit, because not only are, Mercury opposite Uranus is always a big transit, but it is the third of this particular transit thanks to Mercury's retrograde. So what I want to, let me just get everything out of the way except for Mercury and Uranus. All right, I'm going to put this up on the real-time clock, and we're going to start diving in. Okay. So here we are, Wednesday, December 10th. And what I want to highlight, first of all, is the exactitude, if that's a word. Here's Mercury opposing Uranus, really down to some minutes now. If we progress this today, we're going to see that the opposition becomes, it passes through its exact moment this afternoon in the next 3 to 4 hours. So this is a very present transit for us today. Now, if we give it just a little bit of time leading up, we're going to see that the 3-degree range begins on Sunday. So Sunday, if you started noticing something along the lines of what we're going to talk about in today's symbolism, that would be normal, because as soon as the planets get to within about 3 degrees for ancient astrologers, they tend to really show their fruits in manifest events and experiences, and also as they are fading within 3 degrees. This is the time where the fruits ripe on the tree and falling off. So if we think about today as the blossoming, but we also extend that to tomorrow, and the reason that we're going to cut it off a little early and not give it a total full 3 degrees is specifically because Mercury is going to move into Sagittarius. And as soon as the whole sign configuration ends, typically you're going to get more of an abrupt cutoff of the expression of the transit. Not always, but it's a pretty marked change when a planet leaves the whole sign configuration, which for ancient astrologers was absolutely fundamental and necessary for the aspect. You can't just think of an aspect as a degree range. You have to think about it as a sign configuration first and foremost. So what does that mean? It really just means that from Sunday up until about tomorrow, when Mercury switches into Sag, you'll really notice the manifestation of events tied to the transit. Okay, so let's go back in time, though, because what I want to point out is the overall sequence of events that we've been experiencing. So first of all, we saw this transit in direct motion from Mercury around October 29th. Around October 29th, Mercury opposed Uranus in Gemini prior to Gemini backing into Taurus. This was the first pass of their opposition. So one thing you can do, the reason I'm providing you with this is so that if you want to do a little homework, do a little tracking, sometimes looking in your phone, looking at pictures, looking at email receipts can give you some reminders about what was active and present at that time. Sometimes we have a hard time remembering, oh yeah, this sequence of events was happening, or here's where my head was at, or here's what was happening at work, or whatever. So look back if you need to, but this would be the first time, October 29th. Now we go forward a little bit. Mercury is going to turn retrograde with Mars, by the way. That was a fun little retrograde station, wasn't it? Then we come back to Mercury is going to then move backward into Scorpio, and oppose Uranus in Taurus now. This is around November 19th. This would be another moment of, taking a look and saying, okay, like what was happening around this period of time? So this was part 2. Again, if you want to try to connect the 3 stages, I promise you a little bit of digging, you will probably find that each of the successive oppositions are connected thematically or in terms of literal unfolding of events that are connected. But even psychologically connected or symbolically connected, you'll find it if you look for it. That's the point. It can be pretty magical to do so. Now, we're stationing we're turning direct. Mercury is appearing as a morning star. We talked about that recently on the channel. And as Mercury is articulating the first words and thoughts and feelings of its new cycle as a morning star, it's also now hitting an opposition to Uranus. So this is the third and final part of a dialogue between the two planets. What I want to do next is I want to talk with you guys about what this combination of planets represents philosophically. So let me just, I got to move some things. I got to get my notes up on the screen next to me. All right. We're going to go through some. First of all, I want to talk about the planets as archai. Now, the word archai basically means like a first principle. But whether you're an ancient Buddhist or coming from the Vedic philosophy and you're a yogi practicing astrology or divination in Buddhism, although they don't practice horoscopic astrology like we do, Buddhists have many forms of divination. All of these philosophical schools, Stoics, very similar, Platonists, Neoplatonists, Hermeticists, they all, even Taoists, they see the unfolding of reality in the time-space container that we experience it in as unfolding in meaningful patterns. And so this, when we talk about a planet, what we're talking about is a core feature of patterning. And that kind of what an archetype is, right? But when we understand the planets as core features of cosmic patterning, we're really saying they're core features of reality as we know it, core archetypal features. When we get down to that level and understand the planets' combinations at that level, something really special happens, which is that we can start to see something of the intelligent design of, in divine intelligent design of our experiences and of creation itself. And we go from thinking this is right or wrong, that something's happening the way that it is, to seeing something that's bigger, more intelligent, more beautiful, more meaningful than right or wrong. And for many of us, that's exactly the kind of freedom we need. Yeah, there's a level at which we might experience things as good or bad or right or wrong or pleasant or unpleasant. All of that's a real part of our experiences. But the expansion and growth of our consciousness into this multidimensional awareness that astrology is pointing us towards usually happens when we start to see the patterning, and the perception of the patterning moves us to something that includes but also transcends how right or wrong or how pleasant or unpleasant our present experience of something is. This becomes a way of perceiving something like a music, right? It's like, well, how can I really question the fact that I'm in the midst of this undulating, beautifully woven, colorful tapestry? So that's what we want, because that's what allows for us to have a different kind of human experience. And it grants a much deeper sense of meaning in life than, the very shallow way that we assign things like, well, I got something, so that makes me happy, or I lost something, so that makes me unhappy. When we can define happiness along, like in we can have like a bigger aesthetic of appreciation for life, most of us get happier. We feel freer. So let's talk about that now, because actually Uranus and Mercury are together quite frequently associated with that exact kind of liberating mindset. When the mind is suddenly liberated from a limited way of seeing something, perceiving something, understanding something, articulating something, when new language, new thoughts, new paradigms become available to our mind, and we can see more. We feel less confined or constrained mentally, emotionally. That's Uranus and Mercury at their best. So let's talk about why. First of all, archetypes are not just psychological metaphors. Although modern astrology places a lot of emphasis on archetypes as psychological, like behavioral patterns, personality traits, that's just one way of using an archetype. There are many. The at the roots of ancient astrology is the idea that the planets represent archetypes. They are not archetypes in themselves, but they point to them symbolically. And that archetypes are not just psychological metaphors, but real patterning principles in the cosmos. So Uranus and Mercury, for example, reveal how reality expresses novelty, intelligence, communication, reorganization, and constant disruption of patterns that get set in or stuck or boring. Together, they really speak to the kind of constant self-organizing, self-updating quality of the cosmos. Not that I love technological metaphors or analogies, but you know, when you're like, your computer nowadays is just always doing some kind of update and it just automatically updates and you come back and you go, oh, I guess it updated. That's sort of a Mercury-Uranus feature. And that's sort of, analogous to reality. Like reality is constantly going through self-updates, the rearrangements of itself, reorganizing, redistributing, and it's constantly reconfiguring itself in new, interesting, unforeseen ways. That reality itself should be surprising even to itself is a very Uranus-Mercury kind of dynamic. Mercury itself can be thought of as the archetype of mediation, of transmission, and of meaning making. This is why Hermes is associated, the word Hermes is also associated with the word like hermeneutic, which is like the skill of interpretation. Mercury is a messenger, a translator, everything that moves information through the cosmos, synapses, language, symbolism itself, which is why Hermes Mercury rules astrology, a symbolic language, trade, technology. See, the thing people always get offended by when you say astrology isn't a science is they think, well, it does such, it speaks to an energetic level of experience or reality that's very real to us. Yes, but symbols exist, but they're not bound by time. They're not bound by interactions of causal forces or energies. They're acausal, they're infinite, they're eternal. So, what we're really saying about Mercury, for example, is that it is the ruler of symbolic interaction, that anything that looks causal to be interacting, energies, no matter how gross or subtle, thoughts, physical forces, all of their interactions belong to a greater mandala of eternal co-present symbolism. That's Hermes. And Hermes is about the interrelating of things, forces, events, people, words that look like forces acting upon each other back to their interconnected simultaneous reality in a fabric of symbols. Which is it's sort of like saying, reality is like a giant mandala. And Hermes is about what gives us this meaningful sense of everything in the mandala being creatively and intellectually and communicatively related to one another. Mercury governs thresholds between conscious, unconscious, above, below, inner, outer, symbol to time-space reality. It is about linking, bridging, networking, associating. Any kind of pattern recognition and pattern distribution belongs to Hermes Mercury. And Mercury is also about circulation of intelligence. When you ask a question, reality has a way of answering it, especially if you're asking sincerely, meaning you have a real desire to know something. It's like that saying, from the Bible, knock and the door will be opened. Hermes says the same thing, ask and there will be an answer. The answer may come in the form of a riddle, but you will get answers if you ask sincerely, not always immediately, but in time space, answers and questions are co-present with one another in patterning. And so any question you ask, if you stay patient and have pattern awareness, a Hermes property, a Mercury property, you will find that the very question you are asking is embedded in a mandala that includes every possible answer to that question. And there are often many. But Hermes is this principle of asking questions and getting answers, of coming to understand things, of articulating things, and that reality should articulate something of its own nature so that it's cognizable to us, is Hermes. Now, Uranus, on the other hand, is going to be the archetype of breakthrough, awakening, and let's call it system reconfiguration. So it's very, Uranus has been talked about by many modern astrologers as being very Promethean. Uranus, like Prometheus, is a disruptor and a liberator. Uranus is constantly breaking stale forms, catalyzing new orders of thought or being. You remember those, and I've used this on the channel somewhat recently. You remember the iTunes visualizers that were just like moving mandalas that sort of move to the beat of the music? The fact that any pattern that constellates has to change into a novel new pattern, that's Uranus. Uranus is the expression, not just like, there's one way of looking at change is to look at it through the lens of impermanence, very Saturnian. Saturn is linked with impermanence, with death, with endings. But you notice how every single astrologer in the universe brings the phrases death and rebirth together so relentlessly that it feels like, well, God, is every single moment death and rebirth? Well, yes. Yes, in fact, every moment is death and rebirth. They're just two sides of the same coin, which is why we get so, we can get very frustrated by the cliche, and yet it's always an appropriate cliche, because on the Saturnian side, impermanence, death, endings, limits, that's the end of a pattern on the iTunes visualizer. But on the other hand, Uranus is the constant new flashy firework like a lightning strike appearance of a new pattern. So that disruptor and that liberator is just a different way of seeing what often appears as like the end. Like, imagine you're watching an iTunes visualizer and you're like, oh, I really like this pattern. Oh no, it's ending. It's dead. It's, it's reached its limit. It's expired. You're having a Saturnian experience, which is true. Another person who doesn't like that pattern as much sees it change. A new appearance comes into the iTunes visualizer. Oh, look at that. This is exciting and new. It's just a different experience of the exact same thing. Change can be talked about as death. It can be talked about as birth. We're circumambulating something that's eternal. Eternal change can be talked about either as ongoing newness or the constant elapsing or collapsing of oldness. It's relative. So Uranus tends to be about the experience of newness, of awakening, of change that feels fresh and like that. So awakening, liberating, etc. Not surprisingly, Uranus and Saturn, when they come together, often create this intense clash of feeling like something's very limited while something's also awakening. And there's like this push and pull between trying to hold on to something and keep it in the form that it's most familiar in versus something that insists that it be new. Sometimes the thing insisting that it be new is impatient and likes new stuff and can't commit to things, and Uranus is the problem. Other times, the person holding on for dear life to things being the same, tradition, structure that's familiar, they can't let go and let something new come in, even though this new thing would actually liberate them. See, this is a Uranus-Saturn dynamic. But we're talking about just two different sides of experiencing the same flow of reality itself. But the fact that there are different experiences of that flow in reality acknowledge and honor that it is a reality littered with beings who experience it relatively. This is a participatory relational universe. It's not an equation. It's not a math equation. So we have pattern dynamics, fracturing and reformatting systems, quantum leaps, discontinuity, unpredictability, radical sparks of change, usually associated with breakthroughs. Keep in mind, again, where this is taking place in infinity, right? In eternity. So Uranus reveals that reality is not static. The cosmos is constantly evolving through rupture, innovation, destabilization. And truly, all of the ancient mystics, when you say, oh, you mean the cosmos is always getting better? No, that's not what they mean by evolution. They mean it's always changing. And that if you project onto that change, the future needing to be better, right? That tends to create idealist utopians. And then, of course, those people meeting their shadow tend toward dystopia, right? And then the opposite is true for people who stay stuck in the past, saying tradition is all. They get dragged along by progress. But the idea of progress versus regress is itself a comparison already bound up in the duality of time, that from the ancient standpoint, our consciousness is meant to sort of include but transcend. So it's important because Uranus can be very seductive in that what it presents us with is always pushing us into a more beautiful, more progressed, more evolved future. Like we're running along a timeline and the future is where it gets better. That's a tremendously tempting illusion that Uranus can provide us with. It's a real shadow of Uranus. We always have to keep that in mind. So when they interact together, Mercury often receives and Uranus downloads, flash insights, intuition, aha moments, sudden comprehension or revelation of things, messages from the unconscious or the transpersonal field that occur like lightning strikes of creative originality. Mercury communicates, Uranus liberates. There are often new language forms, conceptual frameworks, paradigms, or even just subtle shifts. Like this is 3-4 days worth of a transit. For a lot of people, it may be real subtle, small examples of these things. So when we're talking about them in archetypal form, they can sound a lot bigger. And frequently you will find that the kind of huge level at which we're talking about this and the way at which it might sound very kind of extreme. You're like, geez, I mean, I just had kind of a nice insight about my relationship, but, and it's like, I guess it's a breakthrough, but like you're talking like we're about to, like all create a new quantum computer in our living room or something. And but there's a huge difference. Like when you have Uranus transiting Uranus, opposing your natal Mercury for a couple of years, that's when you tend to get the massive sort of paradigmatic shifts that we're talking about that are much more like biographically significant within the whole arc of your life. Whereas, a 3 or 4 day transit like this, if it's not configured in a really potent way to your birth chart, you might, it may not be as much to write home about. Nonetheless, you can still notice it and experience it. Some new language forms, conceptual frameworks, subtle paradigmatic shifts can still take place. There's a lot of innovation in things like media, technology, astrology, philosophy, symbolism that occur. Even for many people, listening to this talk and getting some new insights about Mercury-Uranus will be the Mercury-Uranus experience. Astrology often is sort of, reified in that way. Mercury will show networks, and Uranus will be the breaks in the network that reconfigure it somehow. Unexpected connections or rewirings taking place. Mercury's logic will meet with Uranus's quantum logic, let's say. This is all just, metaphorical, but the linear thinking gets interrupted by nonlinear pattern recognition. Let me tell you guys a story. This was very, very Mercury-Uranus. This is a wonderful example of Mercury-Uranus that just happened to me. I'm really fond of it anyway, obviously. So what happened was, it was, time for bed. And my daughter was needing a lot of extra stuff. And it's kind of a pattern, it's like one more thing, just one more thing. And anyone who has kids knows what I'm talking about. It's like, oh, fuck, just go to bed. Just go to bed. Shut your pie hole and go to sleep. and you feel so miserable as a parent because you're sitting there wishing that they would become unconscious so you can have your own life. And yet they're struggling to individuate. And you're trying to figure out how much help do I give them and how much do I hold back to let them like learn on their own. And Jesus, I don't need an existential parenting crisis right now. I just lived a whole day and I just want to sit down for 10 minutes and just go to bed. Anyway, you get what I'm saying, right? So this was the scenario that I found myself in. And I said to my wife, and I'm not proud of this, I go, those are not real tears. She's not really crying. She is manipulating you. You're getting hoodwinked. So that was the gist of what I said to my wife when my daughter came down for like one time too many for my patience, which I'm not saying is the measure of anything other than my own, ineptitude maybe. But I was like, it's one time too many. She's just manipulating you. Oh God. So my wife demonstrated patience And she said, yeah, it might be fake, but like, what's the sin in just helping her a little bit? Like giving her a little encouragement, giving her one more hug, whatever. And I was like, like, why do you have to be, it's just kind of like that resentment, like, I don't like that you're right, So I went up and I gave her one last hug, and she shared something with me. She said she was crying, and she said, at school today, we found a dead bird on the playground. And I said, I said something to the dead bird, like, I hope you find your next body okay. Really sweet of my daughter, right? And some other kid goes, what next body? Doesn't go anywhere. It's just dead. Nothing happens after you die. You just die. And it really hurt her feelings. And all of a sudden, in the midst of what looked to me like a long sequence of like excuse making, just, like, grow up, kid, and go to bed. Like, my impatient, like, Cap Moon or whatever. Suddenly it was kind of a deep thing to be thinking about. And, sometimes this happens right before they go to bed. A lot of deep stuff comes up. So I said, okay. And I explained to her, sometimes the things that we hold dear to us, like that we think a bird has a spirit. Some people in the world don't believe those kinds of things. And sometimes you have to kind of keep them secret in your heart. Okay, long story short, gave her a little love, softened my heart, helped out, went to bed. As we're going to bed, just to get in, my little ego stab to my wife, I said, I still think she was faking it. just like a dick move. My wife was like, come on, like, whatever. So anyway, mostly humorous, went to bed. This is crazy. So in the middle of the night, I hear this crying, and I'm like, oh, I thought it was Virginia, my daughter, crying. And I swear to God, it was like loud. And I was like, oh no, I looked at my watch, like maybe been asleep for like an hour and a half. And I thought, oh no, she's still crying up there. Like, that's not good. And so I got out of bed and I went upstairs and I looked, and she wasn't crying. And it was like loud ass crying. And I was like, huh. So I was looking at her asleep and really concerned that maybe she was crying in her sleep. And I was like, geez, I'm a dick. I'm like, I felt so bad. So I got in bed with her, cuddled up with her, just grabbed her. She woke up and she goes, Dad, why are you here? And I said, I thought you were crying, sweetheart, but I'll just sleep with you for a little bit. She said, thanks, and she cuddled in, and maybe an hour and a half goes by, and I get really hot when I sleep. I need a fan on. She gets cold. So I was like, oh, I'm so hot. I'm going to go back to bed. I'm going to go back to my bed, right? But as I'm getting up, I hear the crying again. So I'm like, what is that? I go downstairs, and it was like totally, it was snowing, and it was the wind. The wind was blowing so hard that it sounded like loud crying. And I had this moment, and I sat there and I went, oh, yeah. I said my daughter was fake crying. And so the universe sent me real fake crying to get me back into my heart to be with her. And I started crying standing in the hallway in the middle of the night as I heard the wind crying. And I realized, like, oh, the wind is talking. The wind is crying, and it's sending me to my daughter, who I said was fake crying. So the fake crying actually spoke. It was such a deep lesson. I just can't. And this is, sorry guys, I just love astrology so much, because that's a Mercury-Uranus moment where the trickster intervenes with a very magical, very disruptive event symbolically that can readjust your thinking. Fake crying in a kid that's struggling to individuate is still real crying, you fool. Like, get your shit together. Be a soft person. What is the need for hardness here? Anyway, so real tears, fake. So you see how that's a pattern disruption, though? It's a sudden occurrence of a pattern and an insight and a message through a pattern that can come in and reconvene. And frankly, it was very deep emotionally, which is very consistent with Uranus and Mercury and Scorpio, Uranus and Taurus. So I was so touched by that. And then I made sure to tell her the story the next day, because believe me when I say that my daughter, even though she's 10, just about to turn 10, totally gets that story. I said, you know, last night when you were staying up, I said I thought you were fake crying because you just were having a hard time going to bed. And I thought you were kind of, you know, like you should just go to bed and be a big girl. And I thought it was just kind of fake crying. And then the wind was fake crying and it got me out of bed to be with you. And I said, so even the wind had a little lesson for me. Do you know how special it is for my daughter to have that? I can't even tell you guys, like, to when you're a kid, to be able to live in a magical reality and have a parent who is willing to listen. I'm not saying, like, I'm not trying to trash my parents, but I never had anything like that. You know, my parents were great in their own ways, but like we have such a powerful tool to us, if you are a parent or anyone really, of being able to let moments of imperfection personally or learning personally not be moments where we feel bad about ourselves or ashamed, because the amazement of how we were taught is so much more powerful than the shame or guilt we feel that we weren't getting something right. It's like so easy for me as an astrologer, not always, but like a lot more often for sure than I know it was for my parents to admit wrong, because the means by which you were able to see that you were wrong are just fucking profound. You know? And then if you can convey that to kids, it makes the adventure of learning and culpability so much more interesting. Kids love that. They need that. Like my daughter, I've noticed her ability to say she's sorry is more exciting because she's seen her parents at times model excitement over the opportunity to learn in a moment of mistake, you know? Anyway, okay, I could go on and on. Jupiter's on my sun right now in Cancer, so I've been getting lots of like lessons about being a dad lately. So anyway. Oh, okay. All right. So let's go into our I Ching reading next. Hold on. All right, it's time for some chocolate. I'm like an official chocoholic. All right. All right, let's get the tears. Or stop crying so I can talk. All right. Hexagram, I asked, what does this mean? Like, tell me about this hexagram. I wanted to know. Like, dear I Ching, give me a hexagram that can match the Mercury-Uranus dynamic right now that would be useful for my subscribers. So let's take a look. And for me, I'm part of it. All right, let's get where. Aha, okay, we're almost there. So it's hexagram 58, and I'm going to put that up on the screen here so that if you want to study this on your own, you certainly could if you have a translation of the I Ching. Here we go. So I use the Benabel Wen translation lately. I've used many, but she's my go-to. All right. Hexagram 58 is called Joyous Exchange. Let me just turn off some notifications I'm getting here. All right, Joyous Exchange. What can we say about this hexagram? How does it relate to Mercury opposite Uranus? This is the oracle. By the way, it is lake over lake. So it's a doubling of the trigrams of water, or like a lake, the image of a lake. Inner light shines outward and attracts a kindred spirit. To seek joy is to seek discourse that will advance knowledge and deepen your compassion. To maintain joy, engage in lively intellectual discourse with your peers. Exchange and interchange are the themes du jour. A new experience brings joy. Reach out to old friends and connect heart to heart. Engage in that which is fun. May your mind be pure so joy follows as a guardian angel. A serene lake. Joyous exchange. The sage engages in discourse and study with friends. Prognostication of success, a favorable outcome. Win over the hearts of others through your friendliness, not by force. A lake on its own evaporates sooner. Joined together, two lakes, they replenish each other. Such is the way of knowledge. Learning on your own is not enough. Amplify that education by studying further with others. Sharing knowledge, insights cross-pollinate. Sign of benevolence. A final, gentle warning. Remain guarded when you share your joy or exchange knowledge. No matter how sincere you are, there will be those who seek to exploit you, exploit your knowledge. So first of all, I thought about this and I was like, huh. And then it dawned on me, this is not just the last Mercury opposite Uranus moment. This is the last coming off from a grand water trine. Now, we've talked a lot about the grand water trine, so I don't want to go back into it and, sort of re-explore the whole thing. But one thing we've talked a lot about are collectives that feel emotionally supported. Mercury-Uranus is so frequently about wisdom and insight. It's about those ideas or those symbolic experiences that break you open and that go, oh my God, like in case I forgot that every choice or decision I make is like if I knew that there was a daimon or Hermes or gods sitting next to me when I said those tears are fake, I wouldn't have spoken like that. But I forget. I forget that there are cosmic intelligences, interdimensional beings. I don't walk with soft feet in the world. I walk with fucking heavy feet all the time, But this brings me back. This teaching and this kind of transit and the wind calling me with its fake crying out of bed, those things remind me. I speak, I think, I talk around other beings. Whether I think I'm alone or not, whether I think I'm in privacy or not, I'm in community always, interdimensionally, psychically, emotionally. I'm not even just one being. I'm a collection. I love in Buddhism, for example, the idea of co-arising. Co-arising means that I'm not even really a self. I am like more like a wave being moved by wind. It's like when you see like a pattern forming across like a big cresting wave because the wind's whipping across it. That's actually more like what I am. And so in that sense, like there's this maybe a kind of sense that I have of being like a discrete being, but I'm actually a community. What I call myself is actually like a living ecosystem. So that communal awareness and that communal sensitivity, that's where our bodhisattva compassion and awareness comes from. In Native American traditions, I'll never forget, I went to a teepee ceremony led by a Native American elder in upstate New York. And in that teepee ceremony, he told all of us, you all are walking on a sacred ground and you're not treating it like it's sacred ground. You're treating it like it's yours to walk on. You're not walking around this fire like it's a sacred fire. You're walking around it like it's a thing. And he was not, he wasn't like trying to be mean to us, but he was really trying to impart to us that our Western sort of colonial mindset was just not knowing how to walk with reverence on this earth, which is alive, or around the fire, which is alive, you know? And I just was so struck by it. Not surprisingly, in the Amazon, the same sensitivity about how you walk and carry yourself in the Maloka during an ayahuasca ceremony was present. How you talk to and treat the plants you're ingesting into your body was present. I think one of the things this hexagram reminds me of is that we live in a co-arising, phenomenally rich ecosystem of living beings. And that any insight that comes to us, any learning, any information, any ideas and thought structures, paradigms like astrology or whatever we're learning or thinking about is only as good as it facilitates within our lives joyful, compassionate, sweet living connections with other people. If it's not doing that, if it's making us more cut off, more and more austere, disembodied, dissociated, condemning, self-righteous, convicted but not kind, then that's not a legitimate breakthrough in understanding. What this hexagram tells us more than anything is that a real breakthrough in understanding something mentally, emotionally, a real growth in wisdom that represents a breakthrough in our understanding is seen because of the joyous exchanges and connection it creates between ourselves and other living beings. Win over the hearts of others through friendliness, not by the force of your ideas or convictions. Joined together, we replenish each other. Such is the way of true knowledge. Learning on your own is not enough. Amplify that education by studying with others. Sharing knowledge, insights cross-pollinate, a sign of benevolence. If your ideas reach into the lives of others and make them feel happier, brighter, more seen, more loved, that's wisdom. I mean, we can have great ideas about quantum mechanics or astrology as divination or all of my favorite ideas that I can get really convicted about. But if they're not connecting to other people in a way that makes it feel like there's bodies of water joining together to create fertile, heart-centered, emotionally healing dynamics, then what good is it? What good is all the information in the world about our horoscopes if it's not moving us in the heart to be kinder, more sensitive people? And I had to think about that because the wind cried and got me out of bed and said, you have a lot of nice insights, Adam, but you could be kinder, I was overjoyed when I got this hexagram this morning because it speaks to exactly the insight that I've been having recently about how what good is any of my head knowledge on the screen, even if it's emotionally landing with people out there, but I can't carry that over when I'm at the end of a day with how I parent, well, it's just a show then. Do you know what I mean? And I don't want to be just a show. I want to be real. I want to do what I say I'm going to do. So we have to work at it, don't we? All right. Well, this is the line that was changing is line 5. Check out this one. Trusting that which should not be trusted, there is danger ahead. Naive exchanges, lacking due diligence, or having acted hastily, an exchange took place that should not have happened. You are associating with destructive people. Negative influences push you off your path and toward peril. Others may be using your knowledge for ill intentions. Be careful that those closest to you are not exploiting you. So this has to do with there is a potential with Mercury and Scorpio opposite Uranus and Taurus for information to come to light that means that there's some broken trust, or that there's there's some betrayals that can come to light. It's not uncommon for people under this transit for hidden information to be suddenly revealed or exposed. I think, for example, of all the stuff in the headlines about the Epstein files. There's a lot of that in the sky right now. So this can also be a line that, within this dynamic, there's this broader teaching that we're talking about, but then a specific teaching about let this also be a moment where if the path of wisdom in your life is not aligned with the right people and the right kinds of exchanges with other people, that may come to the surface right now. And the need for sudden liberations from who or what you communicate with or share something with intellectually, spiritually, emotionally. There may be some disruptions in patterns like that that can also be very liberating, but sometimes sort of, like eye-opening and not always easy to look at or see. And that can happen sort of suddenly and maybe disruptively. So that line changing, I thought, was, interesting. So I'm going to leave it there for our I Ching discussion. And I hope that all of this has been, as always, like just useful. Okay, so what we're going to do now, we're going to move into the most practical portion of today's talk, which is going to be our horoscopes. After we're done with horoscopes, we will then I'll plug the Kickstarter one more time and I'll open up for Q&A. So because we have an opposition, we're going to be talking about the balance between two houses for all 12 signs. I recommend listening to this for your rising sign. You can listen to your sun sign too if you want to. Okay. So two areas of life reflected by the opposition between whole sign houses. Here we're talking about moksha and arta for Aries. Moksha in the 8th, arta in the 2nd. What this means, broadly speaking, is that there is a shift in the dynamic patterning of material things, material resources, material assets, and the underlying soul or karmic contracts, emotional, spiritual, contractual, karmic, that exist. And so this is a time where debts can be paid off, karmic contracts can be rearranged, new resources or reciprocal kind of contractual dynamics can be established. And most of those are going to exist in an intimate conversation with things like material assets and resources for Aries. The issue here is that everything in the realm of Arta is material, which means eventually it will die. Everything in the realm of Arta is about relinquishing emotional, spiritual attachments for greater spiritual freedom. So we are looking at a kind of an inflection moment for Aries that has to do with liberating yourself from karma that's not healthy, that's related to material things. So keep that in mind. But those two spaces are conversing if you're an Aries. If you're a Taurus, this is between the 1st and the 7th houses. So now we're looking at Dharma in the 1st and Kama in the 7th. Dharma means, who am I in my essence, in my core? And with Uranus there, it's who am I discovering myself to be, or how am I recreating and disrupting patterns of selfhood? This has been a long time project for Tauruses. I'm part of that club. Mercury in the 7th house is about joy, pleasure, depth, and gratification emotionally, sexually. Kama means bliss. So emotional happiness and fulfillment in interpersonal relationships or social exchanges with other people that are more personal. Here, we're now talking about the potential for a recreation or reconfiguration of something like the self-other dynamic. How I define myself in relation to the people I'm in relationship with, how they help mirror back to me, what I define as pleasure and happiness, and how it corresponds to a more authentic, evolving sense of selfhood. That's the conversation here. Also, just breakthrough dynamics in relationships that are going to facilitate further personal growth. For Geminis, we're looking at the 12th house with Mercury in the 6th. So these two houses are, easily the most difficult houses in traditional astrology. But what's interesting is that the most intense dynamics across these houses are frequently associated with some of the most important moments of change and growth of wisdom in our lives. So it's like hardest, but sort of most spiritually beneficial. That's a way of thinking about these houses that is very, expresses itself this way often. All right, so what I would say about the 12th is you have in the 12th you have a moksha house, meaning liberation. Liberation from karma, liberation from entanglements, liberation from attachments. In the 6th, you have an arta house that's about the difficulties of the material world. Disease, hard work, effort, difficulty, overcoming it as a means to, developing a business, developing a skill. Staying healthy requires upkeep every day. So daily work, daily grind, hard work to maintain or develop things materially or to be healthy materially. So that's the 6th. When these two houses get together, there is often the promise of material confinements and material difficulties being suddenly liberated. That's a great promise. However, the other thing is that when difficulties appear in our bodies, in our minds, in our mental, emotional health, at work, in the daily grind, and we reach a point where something has to break, the difficulties are insurmountable, and we have to surrender somehow, or a sickness comes, maybe even just a cold, knocks you off your horse, and somehow it triggers a much deeper state of reflection on what you're going to do because you've reached a breaking point. But this, for Geminis, and we'll see this with Sagittarians too, is a moment where the karmic difficulties of the world, the material world, are running up against the need for some kind of major revolution and freeing or liberating karmically. Now, again, that could be rather minor if you don't have this activating anything in your natal chart, so don't get too freaked out by it. But especially if you have planets in these houses around the late degrees of the signs, like that's a big deal for you right now. All right, Cancer. For Cancer, it's the 5th and the 11th houses. So we have a Dharma house and a Kama house. Again, they're always opposed to one another, which means we're talking about the conflict between the pursuit of pleasure and happiness and well-being and satisfaction against the need to act in accordance with our most authentic, true selfhood. That's hard because seeking pleasure is a part of life, but pleasure that doesn't accord with our authentic nature is not going to actually make us happy. And that's the conflict between these two types of houses always. It's the same thing between 1st and 7th. Well, I want pleasure and happiness, but I'll marry anyone. You get divorced. Why? Because it wasn't in alignment with your true selfhood. That's Dharma and Kama across 1 and 7. With 5 and 11, it's about your creative essence and your social fit in the world. Like, where do you fit in socially? Where do you experience social validation and success and the realization of dreams that are tied to things like your profession, recognition by peers or the field that you're in, etc. The 5th house is your creative essence. So there's a dialogue going on right now. And on the one hand, it's like, you got to be yourself. On the other hand, it's like, but where is the right place to effectively realize the fruits of my creative work, So questions around where you fit in and where you don't are peaking right now. And who you are in your authentic creative nature are a part of that. All right, let's go along to Leos, where the Mercury-Uranus dynamic is happening across 4 and 10. Now we have Arta and Moksha once again. So worldly material things and liberation from entanglements in worldly things and desires and attachments. The 10th house is work, the public reputation, the public role, public influence or persuasion or power or mastery or fame. And the 4th house is about that private space of release, of rest, of relaxation, of peace, of comfort, of emotional home. So here we have conflict going on between the need for inner depth, security, sweetness, healing, rest, a fulfilling inner or home life experience, and ongoing impulses to change or recreate what your role in the world looks like or your vocation looks like, probably because you're wondering, something like, is my job too stressful? And therefore, I end up bringing too much stress home, and I find myself in a cycle of like disease. I can't find rest or relaxation or liberation. So changing the mold or pattern professionally is tied to looking for inner peace, home, rest, and safety. There's a dynamic conversation happening between the two spaces right now for Leos. All right, so for Virgos, we have the 3rd and the 9th house. This third house, comma, ninth house, Dharma. Again, in the third house, we're really in comma, we're thinking about the emotional joy, happiness, satisfaction of our own psychology, our own mind, and our own emotional makeup. In the ancient tradition, the third house was associated with the moon. That's the psychological, mental, emotional makeup for ancient astrologers. And Mercury was a part of that too, but that's a different conversation. We'll keep that off to the side for now. So in the third house, we're thinking about like, how inhabitable is my own mind, my psychology, my emotional, physical matrix of daily life? How much do I like living in my body and my mind and my emotions? And ideally, I should like it a lot. But in order to like it a lot, for ancient astrologers, you have to cultivate things like emotional intelligence, intellectual intelligence, skill development, pride and confidence in your ego, ability to communicate and articulate yourself, all of these things. The ninth house has to do with Dharma, which is like higher truth. So you can see the conflict. On the one level, it's like, well, I have to be happy in my own mental, emotional, egoic nature. But on the other hand, I have to make sure that I'm in alignment with the higher truth of reality. For example, as good as it might feel to be someone who's sassy and sarcastic, and as much joy as I might get from that, the higher Dharma tells me that if I'm sarcastic and it's hurting other people's feelings, that I'm lacking virtue and my ego needs checking. Well, that doesn't feel great for my ego, especially if I really feel like I love sassy Susie inside of me, you know? So Mercury opposite Uranus across this house is about mental, emotional, psychological adjustments and about higher wisdom. All right. Let's go on to Libras, where we see the second eighth house axis highlighted again. So we're back to Arta, the material world, in the second house, and Moksha, the liberation from entanglements, in the eighth. Again, same conversation we had with Aries. We're talking about liberation of material assets and forms and patterns and values. And we're talking about the reconfiguring of various karmic contracts, those that entangle us and reiterate broken values and misplaced ideas about the material world and what will actually bring us happiness or safety or security, versus the kinds of karmic contracts that we have with other people and the kinds of soul dynamics that provide us with a template for how to live in the material world while still having a deeper, higher sense of what constitutes real happiness. Things don't get me happiness, but I also have to live with things. So how are we balancing that? What's the conversation right now internally, psychologically, within relationships around things like values, money, resources? And also, what do you owe people and what do they owe you? And how are those books being accounted for right now, spiritually or karmically? All right, let's go on to Scorpios. Same exact dynamic as our Tauruses. First and seventh house, Dharma and Kama. So selfhood, individual identity. And on the other hand, the pleasure or joy we seek in intimacy, sex, relationships, marriage, any kind of meaningful interpersonal dynamic could be here too. So this is a moment for deepening insight around who you are, around what other people are. Really meaningful, insightful things can happen right now in your relationships that free you up, that free the other person up, that change patterns of relating and that lead to deeper insight into your own nature. So same dynamic, just flipped. Sagittarians, it's the same thing. We have moksha and we have arta. So here we're talking about some pretty deep psychological realizations, maybe some very important hidden communication dynamics, the messenger of Mercury in the 12th, bringing things to your awareness from an unconscious or hidden place somewhat suddenly in ways that can bring about, kind of like obstacles or adversity materially at the exact same time. For example, when you find out that something's happening at your company, it's been kept secret, now it's being revealed, it disrupts everything, it creates a degree of chaos and obstacles you have to overcome. That would be very consistent with these two planets across these two houses. But also any kind of breakthrough psychologically and emotionally that leads to insight that can give you a better way of dealing with the day-to-day work, stress, health, things like that. All right, let's go to Capricorns. We're back, same thing as Cancers, 11 and 5, comma and Dharma again. So now we're talking about your authentic creative nature and the need to reconfigure your creative essence in Uranian manners, your creative pattern, and its connection to how you're evolving as an individual soul is really loud right now with Uranus culminating in your 5th house. This is the opportunity to take 7 years worth of personal creative evolution and put it into play. Socially, the conversation is, are these the right people? Is this the right place? Are these the right aspirations, given who I am creatively and authentically? So social dynamics, professional dynamics, and creative dynamics in conversation. All right, for Aquarians, same thing as Leos, just flipped. We have Mercury in the 10th house, that's Arta. We have Uranus in the 4th house, that's Moksha. Conversation, again, is between things like work, the public world, and home or family. So if you think about it from the standpoint of Mercury in the 10th, having gone through a retrograde, turning direct, we're talking about reconfiguring our mind, or details or plans or organizational strategies or approaches, the way we do things, implementation of different technologies. Maybe you've gone through some kind of redirection of how you're doing work, or where you're working, or who you're working with, or even just the sense of what motivates you has been changing with Mercury's recent retrograde in this house. But it's in such an intense dialogue with Uranus in the 4th, which asks you to include, do these changes feed into the need for deeper liberation, rest, healing, safety, emotional bondedness in a private sphere of life? If these things are dragging me out into more and more activity and public definitions of success or happiness, and they might be cutting me off from something that I need to go to. It's like a well that I have to draw from. I can't deny with too much of an external or 10th house kind of focus. All right, finally, Pisceans, same thing as Virgos with the 3rd and 9th house axis. So we're talking about Dharma in the 9th and comma in the 3rd. Well, in the 3rd house for 7 years, you've been going through an opportunity to radically redefine your mind, your psychology, your mental, emotional, disposition. Maybe you've learned new things, learned how to communicate, articulate yourself in new ways. You've become maybe a bit more of a rebel, more willing to speak out or to act or behave differently. And you've experienced the benefits. I'm happier with myself because I've done these things. But then there's questions about, how do these personality changes that are about the happiness of your ego in this lifetime, so important, but how do they correlate with higher truth, with higher virtue, with higher philosophical commitments or convictions, with spirituality or religion, with learning something bigger that transcends the ego? The question that's really intense across that axis right now, the need to synthesize higher truth with personal expression. Okay. All right, we've made it through our horoscopes for the day. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to plug the Kickstarter one more time, and then we're going to open up for some Q&A. Let's see, how are we doing? So we've been live for an hour and 20 minutes. We've had an upward of 500 people here, and we have had 5 backers. So this is where I'm just going to pound the drum. Let's go. We need some more support. We need some more backers today. We need more than 5 for sure. So I'm going to put the link into the comment section and politely guilt trip all of you to support the channel and support Nightlight, support this community. There's a lot of us now at Nightlight that are here making sure that all of this content is accessible for everyone. So there's the link to the Kickstarter campaign. If you have not yet gone over there, please head over and support us. Pick up a cool reward when you do. Look, guys, we have about, as of the time that I'm making this, we've got 22 days left to get about 1,500 more backers, which means every day when someone just says, you know what, I'll take 2 minutes, I'll go over there, I'll make a $10 contribution. That helps us. It helps us toward our goals. So please head over there if you haven't yet. Again, pick up a cool reward, pick up a class pass, 50%, 70% off class bundles when you get them. You're going to see the rewards on the right-hand side. They are all awesome, really cool stuff. So if you haven't yet, please go over there. One thing that I'll also say is that like, if one of the things that I value as a content creator that I can promise you are going to keep receiving in the year ahead, and I think it's worth supporting this channel, is that there are not a lot of astrologers, and I pride myself on this because it's something that I know I need in the way that I learn. So I make sure to model that, because it's like, well, what I learn from is personal storytelling. So when all of my favorite teachers that I've had in my life have been people that commit to sharing their own process, not just the information, but how, as a spiritual, like emotional person, they're actually living and seeing some of these things play out. How are you actually learning? How is your process? That you're not just sitting behind a wall of information. So if you value content that, from myself, from all of our staff at Nightlight, that's always led by like, let's make this personal. Let's give the information. If you want to become an astrologer, you want to learn about a transit, but let's convey it in a way that deepens our humanity and connects to each other. That is intentional. That is crafted. That is something that I pour a lot of heart and soul into making sure that it's delivered in that way. And I think it is rare among astrologers. I'm certainly not the only one to be like this. I'm not saying that. But I don't think, I wish there was more of it. Do you know what I'm saying? So if you find that valuable, please consider supporting us, because year after year, we're able to keep doing this and thriving and creating in this way, because people like yourself say, yeah, I do get something out of it. So you pitch in and support us. Okay. That's it for my pitch for the day. Let's get into some Q&A. What questions do you guys have? I'm going to take a nibble of chocolate and let's head into some Q&A today. Can you please explain? Sorry, I'm trying to understand this. Can you please explain the horoscope pack that is $49? Yeah. The $49 Astrology of 2026 is an hour and a half long, basically like lecture or talk on all of the major transits of the year ahead from an archetypal perspective. There's no horoscopes. It's just me saying the eclipses are here. Jupiter's opposite Pluto here. Saturn and Neptune are getting together here. Uranus trines Pluto in these months. This is the biggest lunation of the year. And I'm talking through their meaning on a symbolic archetypal level, like for everyone. Then you're going to find that the year ahead horoscope readings distill like 6 of the top things from that video into all 12 whole sign horoscopes. So the year ahead horoscope readings are like 4 to 5 hours of audio video, whereas the year ahead is like an hour and a half lecture on the major transits of the year from an overview perspective, right? So it's just like one's an archetypal perspective, one's horoscopes. That's the idea. The year ahead is going to include more in terms of the coverage of the full year, whereas the horoscopes boils it down to like 6 big things for every sign. So, yeah. Let's go. We can raise the barn together. Thank you. Yes, we can. We can do it. We can do it. We've gotten to our goal 12 years in a row. We've been able to make it, and it's because people like you guys support us, and we appreciate that. All right. I can see the symbolic patterns in transit or natal placements clearly, but articulating the meaning in digestible language is harder for me. Any tips on developing the skill of translating? Yes, that is the focus, by the way, of our entire third year program. Is we call it a counseling program, but it's really about how to take astrology from knowledge to conveying it personally with a real person. So year 3 in our programs are all about that. So like, come study with us because I've got a whole year where I could talk to you about that, But the first step is to recognize. There's a video I'm doing this Sunday. It's a bonus episode on Sunday, and it's about how astrology is able to predict the future. And it talks a lot about patterns and symbols. Most of the time, people don't have a hard time seeing the pattern, which is what you're saying. You can see the symbolic patterns, but you can't articulate them. The reason you can't articulate them most of the time, or anyone, is because a pattern is vast. And seeing a pattern is a bit like seeing a floating tapestry. It's like, oh my God, look at the design, right? It's very intricate and elaborate. How do you begin? Where's an entry point to talking meaningfully about something as ornate and decorative and intricate and complex as a fucking tapestry? Such a potty mouth. I attribute it to all of the Sagittarius energy. Anyway, so how do you get into it? Context. This is a key feature of divination. All divination works according to context. There is really no example in the ancient world in any divinatory context of just sitting down and dry reading for people. In almost all historical examples of divination, a querent, meaning a questioner, comes to a diviner with a specific context in mind. What context does, from the tone of voice to the story that someone's living, to the details they give you, the backstory, it allows you to take that symbolic pattern recognition and go from seeing the big tapestry to taking the context and finding it in a more specific like niche of the tapestry. That's where you're also able to identify most likely outcomes. It's through context awareness and symbolic pattern recognition coming together. That's what everybody knows intuitively about tarot. Someone comes to you with a question, you have maybe a 3-card spread or a Celtic cross or something. The context of the cards, the backstory, the emotional dynamics of the person telling you the story, all of it is going to incline you to read the cards and the juxtaposition of the cards in very specific ways that, will often lead to, maybe certain kinds of predictive outcomes if you are someone who even makes a predictive outcome or not, a prediction or not. But it's context. So the best thing that you can do to be able to articulate or translate is not dry read for people, but get context from people first. It's context that drives your ability to go from being a good pattern recognizer to being someone who can locate a story within the multidimensionality of a pattern. That's crucial, absolutely crucial. Okay, so I hope that's useful. Because I'm in your year 1 class, plan on going all the way to year 3. Great. Fantastic. Go for it. We hope you will. Let's see. Thanks for the wonderful content today and every day, Adam. Proud and excited to contribute. Thank you. Thank you so much. Really appreciate that. What's your perspective on wishing for stuff? What if it involves other people? Yeah. Let me show you something. Oh, no, never mind. I can't. No, that's going to be too hard for me to show you. Let me take a different approach here. So, wishing is like natural, right? So on one level, it's like what I think about wishing doesn't matter because it just exists and it's happening. Like, people wish for things and people have wishes come true, and people, don't always get what they wish for, and people wish they wouldn't have wished for something because of what happened and they were unconscious about what they were wishing for. So to me, it's about understanding that there's nothing in reality that we experience that isn't a part of a pattern. So like a good way of thinking about wishing is to enter into the patterns of wishing. Why do people wish? Because they have desires and hopes and dreams, and they imagine that there's something else in somewhere else or someone else that will fulfill them or grant happiness. And is there anything wrong with that? Well, there could be, but maybe there's not. I mean, we tell on one level, it's like if you're always wishing for something in the future, then what does the pattern say? If someone's like, oh, they're just like chronically unhappy and always wishing for things, we know that pattern. That pattern is the pattern of why don't you try to find happiness in your present moment, in yourself, right? Okay. On the other hand, someone might be enslaved in some movie or story, and they're like just wishing for freedom. would we tell the person they should just be happy in their current condition? That'd be pretty myopic, right? So on the other hand, in a different context, the pattern of wishing is totally different. So in other words, any way that you want to think about something philosophically from an archetypal perspective, and Buddhists teach us this. So, I mean, listen to, or just take some time with like Alan Watts, for example. Listen to the way he talks about anything and everything. And it really can teach you to think about stuff like this. Like, wishing is itself an archetype, and all of the realities that emanate from the activity of wishing, the good ones, the bad ones, the lessons we learn about wishing, good or bad, they're all part of like a tapestry hanging in the halls of reality that says, this is the wishing tapestry. So I don't have an opinion about it, but I'm very careful when I engage with it, that I don't engage with it from the standpoint of thinking that something in the future that I don't have that I wish for will fulfill me, because I have learned enough in my life at this point to recognize that that's usually not good for me. And that, so I have to be. But on the other hand, I find that there's a very childlike, wonderful way in which I wish for things, but I'm also not attached. You know what I mean? And that kind of wishing is really not very problematic in my life. So, yeah. I've been turned on to whole sign house versus Placidus after listening to you. Are there times when you use different house systems? I've heard other astrologers say they use different systems for different things. Well, I say this all the time. But Indian astrology and ancient Hellenistic astrology are not house systems. They pre-exist house systems. So when you learn ancient astrology, everything is taking place in a paradigm that is whole sign in nature, which means that like it's so much more than a house system. It's a way of thinking about everything in the chart. Most people don't understand that, because in modern astrology, we think of whole signs as an option among house systems. But the idea that there even are house systems, not just the whole sign paradigm itself, which is where it all started, is a kind of problem. The reason I say that is because it's only from the standpoint of modern astrology that we even think of whole sign houses in terms of an optional house system. Optional house systems itself as a thought is modern. Ancient astrologers just had a paradigm, and it was whole sign, what we would now call whole sign in nature. But the point I'm making is that if you go back and study ancient astrology, like come study with us, you're going to learn that whole sign becomes the way that you see everything, aspects, dignity, the relationship between archetypal meanings of houses, depending on the whole sign configuration of the chart, are all connected. So it's not just a house system, and comparing it without knowledge of the entire paradigm of ancient astrology is not possible. You will only be comparing something on a very superficial level. Even if it's already attractive to you, that's great. I would highly recommend that you not just start using it with your modern understanding, though, but that you go back and learn from the roots, because then you're going to get so much more. You're going to know what you're actually looking at and how to use it, which is a totally different level than just like, I flip my chart to whole sign and I like it better. You won't even know what you're looking at from a whole sign perspective until you study all the philosophy and techniques that go with it, in other words. I know that might sound strange, but just trust me when I say that. Like you really have to, it's not just a house system, it's a whole language. Technical I Ching question here. How do you draw your I Ching readings? Do you randomly turn a page in your I Ching book? Is there a formal system that you use? So yeah, you can toss the coins. You can use Yarrow stocks, ichingonline.net. You can do it virtually if you want. I'm fine with that personally. And you can just, if you search I Ching methods for casting, you're going to find like a zillion articles telling you how to do it. I usually cast coins, or if I'm out and about and I need to really sit with something and I'm in my car or whatever, I might use ichingonline.net. Oh my God. There are some crazy people. Oh, how do we learn more about synodic cycles? Come study with us. I know you do. But I would also say, if you go to the shop page, the master classes, I taught 10, 12 hours on the synodic cycles of Mercury and Venus. That's a good starting point. We cover some of it in the programs, but I've yet to do the synodic cycles of Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. I'll probably do that in a master class in the next couple of years. So, yeah. Definitely going to donate before the end of the campaign. It's already paying for my Nightlight studies. Thank you. Really appreciate that. I'm currently in the year 1 course. Thanks to tuition assistance, I was able to purchase a course bundle so I can enroll in year 2 and 3. Yeah, that's awesome. I'm really glad to hear that. Year 3 is, I think, our most well-liked program. But yeah, like, I think it's just because a lot of people find value in the live client readings we do and so many conversations about how to communicate and convey astrology and like technique to real people. Debbie says, I'm in year 1 and highly recommend enrolling. Thanks, Debbie. Appreciate you. Let's see. Other questions? Hello. All right, let's see here. Uranus is on top of my sun again, and some major changes are happening, to put it mildly. Yeah, isn't that transit exciting? It's just that's a very powerful transit. All right, I'm putting the Kickstarter link in. We have had 10 donations as of the start of this hour and now 40-minute meeting. Putting the Kickstarter link in again. Let's see if we can get it to 20. I feel like we can get 20 backers. Let's see if we can get to 20. That would be 10 more before the end of the day. Like 20 to 30 is always it's like a pretty good day. Everyone always waits till the end. Every single year. The last 4 or 5 days, it usually kind of goes bananas. So I'm kind of used to that, but I'm also like, guys, how about we not give me a heart attack this year? Okay, I'm just kidding. Let's see. We have a little bit of time left, so if you have a question, feel free to put it into the chat. I'll see what I've got here. I'm going up. I think I probably missed some earlier. If you have questions for me personally, you want to get to know me more as a content creator, you have questions about astrology, philosophy of astrology, anything is welcome. Hi, Adam. What are some schools of thought on pursuing chart rectification versus having a reading done without a birth time and crafting with existing info in a chart? I like both, but seems hierarchical. I mean, I think the process, ritualistically, the process is what matters. So, William Lilly used to cast charts for people that didn't have birth information simply by casting a chart for the day and moment they arrived at his like office. That would be their birth chart. So astrology is pretty flexible on these points, but I think rectification, if you find it with someone whose process and let's call it their energy, kind of matches with yours, then that's probably a good way of establishing some radicality of the rectified chart. But you can do that, you can establish that radicality, that sort of lightning rod quality in a lot of different ways. So it's not like there's only one that works when you don't have your info. Yeah. Oh, thank you, Jenna. That's so nice. And thank you so much. Hi, Adam. Do you think the nodes are the most important, important point in our chart? I know it's a combination of all, but just wanted to ask. Also a student of yours. Awesome. Well, no, I don't think, here's what I like. Let's unpack that question a little bit, because there's some really juicy stuff behind it. The idea that there would be a most important something in your chart, right? What we're subtly thinking when we frame a chart in that way is that this chart is containing like some objective information about me, and there's like a hierarchy of the importance of that information and either its objective value or like significance in my life. There are things in charts that tend to be louder in terms of the presence of that symbol in like a biography. But that does not always correspond to how we place value or meaning on the events of our biography. For example, I have a client that I've used her chart to illustrate this many times in my classes. She has an exalted Mars in her 10th house in Capricorn, total, kick-ass corporate woman. She rarely wants to talk about her work. Like I would say for her kids, her family, her parents, her marriage, like way more personally invested. Well, those dynamics of her chart, according to sort of classical hierarchical delineation techniques, are not as loud as that exalted Mars. So if we look at a chart looking for what's most important, we have to ask, by what value system of importance are we what value system of importance are we projecting onto the chart? Because even most of the classical techniques for finding the loudest, strongest planets in a chart that have loudest voicing may not always correlate to what we experience subjectively as the most meaningful parts of our life. Right? So that becomes really, that's like it's something we always have to think about. The other thing is that your chart has different points of importance depending on why you approach it. So what I want all of my students to think about when we study astrology is that your chart is not a blueprint of who you are. Your chart is a living, mantic, oracular device. It's ritualistically aligned with you because it was ritualistically cast for the moment of your birth with you as a soul in mind. But that doesn't mean that it contains a blueprint like modern psychological, like character blueprint would have us believe. Instead, what's really good to think about is that at 20, when you approach it with a relationship question, the same chart will have oracular meaning to present and most important points to provide you with, because you're 20 and you're curious about a relationship. Whereas when you're 40 and you're interested in parenting, the same chart will have different points of importance that will speak more loudly. And it's always the case. Day by day, it's the case that why you approach the chart, how you approach it, with what in mind, with what context you bring, will feature different points of importance speaking. Because it's more like a cell phone to the gods than it is something that you are. Does that make sense? Okay. Hi, Adam. Finished year 1 and got my certification recently. Could you talk a bit about how you talk with someone when their chart has a majority of challenging aspects? Well, same thing, basically the same thing I just said. Those challenging aspects will have completely different meanings depending on why the person is there talking with us. So you never want to go into a reading thinking they have a chart full of challenging aspects. How do I find a way of talking about it? What you want to do is, develop a kind of awareness, get yourself familiar with the chart before a reading, and then get context. Well, I'm here to talk about money. Now that challenging aspect has a context, and that challenging aspect may be more or less challenging depending on which context the client is bringing, or that might have a very constructive way of talking about it, a difficult aspect between two planets, given the context and how we assign signifiers in one situation versus another. This kind of situational awareness is dramatically absent in modern astrology. And that's because we're bereft, we're missing the language of ancient technical astrology that is all context based. It's all of the rules of ancient astrology are about how to read something based on a context. So I would say that you almost never want to go in thinking they have a majority of challenging aspects. That's already too abstract a way of thinking about a chart that's still feeding back into that idea that the chart is one thing. It's not one thing. It's an oracle. With whole sign houses, what do you say about the ascendant cusp being late at 28 or 29? How do you read the whole sign then? The same way you would in any other context. It doesn't matter which degree of the sign is rising. From 0 to 29, that's the first house. It's that simple. And it doesn't need to be more complicated than that. Ancient astrology is more like a card game. It's like much more like tarot than people realize. In fact, there were devices that ancient astrologers had that were like a board that had like an inner circle that could turn and align the whole signs with like boxes that then little gemstones would be placed in to represent the planets. Like this was like there in the ancient world, literally readings were done like a board game. This is like people, we have like taken some kind of fucked up engineering mindset and projected it onto astrology. It's crazy. So any degree rising is just the first house. That's it. And then the rest go around the wheel. Can you speak about your health journey and physical transformation? I was floored when I saw an old episode of you speaking and the transformation is significant. Well, I was like really deep into a tradition that, yogic tradition that placed a lot of emphasis on spiritual things and psychological, emotional, mental things. And I realized, at a certain point, I started really feeling cut off from my physical body. It's just like an awareness growing in me that there was a shift in my life that happened when I was a teenager where I was a very like athletic, physically embodied type of person. And then a lot of life events happened and I really went inward. It became much more like mental, emotional, artistic, and intellectual. And I sort of left a part of me behind. And being in this tradition that was so focused on otherworldliness really, in a weird way, brought back that repressed part of me. It like brought it right to the surface because it felt like it was being more actively suppressed within the tradition. So I just became more aware of it within myself. And then I was like, no, this isn't right. Like this part of me needs to, even if it's just a desire that I have not let go of yet, it's not going to be good to repress it. So I have to find a way for this to come out. So I started seeing a trainer not too long after I left the yogic tradition. About a year later, I left the yogic tradition I was a part of. I would say what's going on 4 years now. I've had 5 or 6 days a week that I've worked out weight resistance training and cardio, and started in the past 2 years started training with a bodybuilding coach, and yeah, just transforming my body day by day. Just as it's funny because it's just the body, shaping the body, caring for the body, greatly improves mental, spiritual, emotional, like psychological health. It greatly improves, well-being. It's like, to me, it's like the equivalent of like, well, I still meditate, I still pray, I still have contemplative space. None of that's gone from my life, but the temple's a lot cleaner. The temple feels a lot better because I'm caring for my body. I see a nutritionist. I have meal plan that I follow. I work out regularly, all of that. So yeah, and I would say like that part of me feels like it's now back. Like it's a part of, and that was Uranus in my first house, like over like seven years or whatever. I feel like that was really the transformation. And now it's like just as important to me as any other part of my spiritual life. It's it's like if you're not going to care for the temple that houses the spirit soul, we're missing like a big part of the equation. However we do it. So that's how I feel about it. I think I also got a lot of messaging from different spiritual traditions that masculinity was evil. And I'm not trying to have a big debate about that, because God knows that, there's problems with masculinity that are very real, and male energy can be suppressive and all that stuff. But there was a part of me that needed to figure out what it meant and looked like. Like part of my avoiding having a healthy masculine was to stay rooted in things that were like really intellectual and heady, psychological and spiritual, which was in me appeared as a voice saying like all of that masculine stuff is a bad, unhealthy, worldly, materialistic distraction. I was actually avoiding like a part of me that was really seeking to integrate and understand my own masculinity. So not surprisingly, at the outset of this process, one of the things that happened was I went and saw a naturopath, and went to a clinic and got tested and found out that I had low testosterone, or low enough to be eligible for testosterone therapy. So I started that, and I'm on a very low therapeutic dose of testosterone, but it was a game changer. Like it contributed very positively. I have all respect for like however people approach their health. I'm not trying to be evangelical about it, but it was very positive for me personally. And I frankly, I think probably there's a good, I know a lot of men that I think could probably benefit from it, but there's a lot of stigma around it too. Like, there's a lot of judgments that people have. So anyway, thank you. That was a fun question. I just pledged as an annual birthday gift to myself. Thank you. That is awesome. Really appreciate that. Let's see. We need 7 more backers to get to 20 on the day. We can do it. If you haven't made one yet, here's the link. I'll put it in the comments section again. What is the importance of the final dispositor in a natal chart in comparison of the chart ruler? Nothing. These are all ideas that honestly, for the most part, don't help people. There's a final, like, let me just put it this way. There is no consistent historical technical belief in or adoption of a final dispositor. It is one of 100 examples of a very interesting, very compelling symbolic idea. But symbolic ideas they're only as useful as they are appropriate in context, right? So if you follow the pathways of rulerships in a chart and everything keeps pointing back to a certain planet, the point is to let that perception be creatively informing the use of symbols in a reading. You don't need to use final dispositors to have, there's a million other ways that you can find creative resonance in a reading. It's just a technique. The whole history of astrology is filled with techniques. Now, there are very, very basic rules and ideas in ancient astrology that are worth learning because they stay consistent across thousands of years. But things like final dispositors are not like consistently used or talked about. So their value is really only as good as your creative implementation of them, which, I'm just encouraging you to reflect on whether or not you really need it or not. Because I would say, for example, depending on the context that is presented to you, someone wants to talk about health or someone wants to talk about their marriage or something, following that chain of dignities to a final dispositor may or may not be useful compared to something 10 times more obvious sitting right in front of you. You know, if they have a fallen moon in Scorpio in their seventh, and it leads to Mars and everything else leads to Mars in the chart, well, making a meaningful connection between that fallen Mars and Scorpio and or fallen moon in Scorpio and wherever Mars is could be like very meaningful in the reading. But honestly, you could always just talk about the moon in Scorpio in the seventh for a whole hour, So we limit ourselves to techniques when techniques are supposed to be a part of how we move about creatively and freely. That's the point. There is no chart ruler either. That's not a thing. There's different techniques for finding something like the ruler of the nativity or the master of the nativity, but those techniques are diverse. There's different methods for doing it, and they're not consistently done across 2,000 years of astrology. A chart ruler could be said to be your ascendant ruler, but even then, it doesn't rule your chart, right? That's a fancy way of saying that we find your character, we find you as a soul with an ego and a behavior and a mind through the ascendant ruler, but calling it your chart ruler is a little aggrandizing, potentially, so all of this has to be considered. I hope that helps. I've had some clients overdo it with testosterone. It's good you keep the dose low. Well, with all due respect, I'll just, this is really none of your business, but I appreciate your concern, but you shouldn't give advice to people that they're not asking for about medicine. Whenever people do that, I just tell them like, you gotta check yourself there. Would you ever consider doing a YouTube series on Jeffrey Cornelius or Richard Tarnas's Cosmos and Psyche? Yeah, actually, not so much Cosmos and Psyche, because I feel like, what could I possibly add to that? And it's like so dense and huge. That would be a very overwhelming task. But I do feel like Jeffrey Cornelius's, I do feel like his book would be a very good one to cover, because that's a book that not a lot of people will necessarily take the time to read, and it could be really helpful to have almost like a guide for reading it, I'm feeling called to pursue knowledge of the I Ching, but I have devoted my brain cells to really embodying astrology. Then I will branch out. Do you think there's room to do both simultaneously? I've been able to compartmentalize the two for myself, but I don't know. I have Mars and Gemini. I'm good at spinning a couple plates at the same time. So if it overwhelms you, I wouldn't do it, just focus on the astrology. But you could try it. And if it feels overwhelming, then just focus on the astrology. Yeah. Let's see here. Okay. Well, we're at about 2 hours, so I feel like this has been a really nice session today, and I think I'll probably end it here. Let me just make sure I'm not missing any good, rich questions. Oh, this one's good. For solar return charts, what's your take on using the native's birth location versus their current location when casting the chart? Well, I would just say, like, it's a symbolic choice, not one that's about being more objective. Like, you could look at both if you wanted to. I feel like that might be a little overwhelming, but I just use the birth location and keep it consistent. But that for me has to do with, for me, it's about clarity, consistency, simplicity, economy of craft, which are all like dealer's choice. Like it's just how I roll. Certainly you could relocate your solar return chart. Like I don't see there's anything wrong with it. Even play with the two and see which one feels more accurate at the end of the year. That would be a great idea. Second year, I pledged for a course as a Christmas gift for myself. Looking forward for year 3. Yeah, excellent. That's awesome. What do you think of dominant planets, dominant elements in a chart creating a signature? I found it to be spookily accurate. Yeah, well, I mean, we have all different kinds of ways of recognizing like loud patterns in charts. Certainly, like an abundance of planets in an element. Sure, that would be one of them. Or maybe very loud angular planets, or planets that have really badly debilitated classically, or really strong classically, or whatever. Sure, they can create some pretty loud patterns in a person's life. Yeah. The I Ching and Hermetic astrology overlap in interesting ways. I agree. Yeah. And you guys know, if you watch my channel, there's a whole series you can watch on my channel on the Hermetica. That's pretty good. How do you recommend people frame questions for horary readings? So the most important thing to understand is that horary is not going to give you like advice. So if you say, what should I do? That's not really ideal for horary. If you say, when is the best time to do something? That's not really ideal for horary. What is yes, no questions. So will this relationship turn into a marriage? Would I be happy if I took the trip to Bali? Like, would the trip make me happy? If I make an offer on this house, will it be accepted? So it's like yes, no, outcome oriented questions for the most part. If I start this business, will it be successful? Will my business be will my business do better this year financially than it did last year? Stuff like that. About to pledge, just have to get my card downstairs. All right. Yeah, let's go. We need 7 more backers. So where is my lost ring? Yeah, that can be a thing. I'm going to put the link to the Kickstarter in one more time here. Yeah, I already talked about this one. Someone's asking about whole sign house cusps. Yeah, where is my lost ring is interesting. I just solved a missing item horary. I was missing my sunglasses, and was able to quickly identify that they were in the laundry room with a horary, which was really fun. And then I went in, and there they were. If we're back again, does it need to be a different email? Oh yeah. If you're going to back twice, it'll let you modify your original backer total and pick new, like you can add rewards or whatever. But if you're going to make a separate donation, it needs to be a separate email on Kickstarter. Yeah. Well, I think that'll do it for today. I hope this was fun and interesting, and that you got something really good out of the conversation around these two planets and the I Ching reading, some storytelling, some good horoscopes. It's always a pleasure to be with you guys. One last time, don't forget to support the Kickstarter today. If you get a second, go over there, pitch in, help us reach our goal. Really appreciate and love all of you guys. We'll be live streaming next Friday on Venus Saturn. So we'll get together for Venus Saturn talk and some horoscopes and a live Q&A. All right, you guys have a great rest of your day. Take it easy, everyone. Bye.